The wounds are still healing for some. The sharp-edged one-liners seem to be changing hands. And those who seek to be your fearless leader are heading into the belly of the northeastern beast seeking answers. And we are left to seek out what really happened Monday night in Iowa. We are left to decide if Ted Cruz did indeed shock the world and beat back the vile pollsters, or if Donald Trump defeated himself by making more than a few uncharacteristic missteps. And where did Marco Rubio come from? On the left, Hillary Clinton has been around this bend more than once, and anybody who claims her to be panicking has zero idea of what a presidential run at this stage really is. And Bernie Sanders very well might still find his celebration muted. There's this guy who, interesting hair, he's got it, isn't exactly hanging his head in shame. 3 contenders who believe New Hampshire will save their maple syrup in time to keep them from becoming saps. Anyone heard from the Tea Party lately as well? We got questions. Let's pour from the vat of brutal honesty. I'm Ed Berliner. This is The Hardline for Tuesday, February 2nd, 2016.
We will go on to get the Republican nomination, and we will go on to easily beat Hillary or Bernie or whoever the hell they throw up there.
Donald Trump is a beaten man. Ted Cruz is closer to a coronation. Marco Rubio is playing to a certain vote from wherever anybody thought he would come from, and the evangelistic side, and they're shocked. Iowa has set a tone that few will be able to recover from. Now that we have dealt from the bottom of the hyperbole deck, let's talk intelligently how one group of people, one very powerful group of voters, grabbed this Iowa caucus by the horns and turned everything upside down. Always a pleasure to welcome back the CNBC contributor and best-selling author of The Entrepreneur Equation, Carol Roth, joined by the Christian commentator, columnist, and author of Femmevangelical, The Modern Girl's Guide to the Good News, Reverend Jennifer Crumpton. Ladies, thank you so much for being here, and let us get right to her. Carol, this one comes to you first. Did Ted Cruz win in Iowa, or did Donald Trump lose?
I think squarely Ted Cruz won in Iowa. He had an amazing, well-organized campaign and ground game, and he was able to get people out in record numbers. It was truly, I tip my hat to him. I think he did a really phenomenal job, and there really wasn't that much of a difference between his numbers and Trump's numbers. We all knew Iowa was a tough place for Trump. He skipped the debates. He didn't have much of a ground game there. I certainly would not count him out at this point, but have to give props to Ted Cruz for his amazing win.
All right, but what about those people who say, and I also quote the New York Times opinion pages today from David Brooks, who says, and I quote, "In Iowa on Monday night, we saw the limit of Trump's appeal. Like any other piece of showbiz theatrics, Trump was more spectacle than substance." Come on, Carol, he made a lot of mistakes.
How do you say that with the kind of numbers that he pulled? He did incredibly well.
But those numbers didn't show up, though, Carol. Those monstrous numbers we were told he was going to pull, he didn't have them.
He ended up with the 7 delegates. Look, the media is so excited to finally be able to call him a loser since he's been using that name over and over again. But I cannot see how you have that kind of a showing and say that he's completely out of the race. It was incredibly close between him and Cruz, and I think you'll see in New Hampshire that he ends up on top again.
All right, Reverend Crumpton, I come to you next. Before I get to the evangelical question, I want you to respond to what Carol just said, because, hey, wait a minute. Donald Trump had this massive lead coming into Iowa. Yet still, if you look at it, someone said today that he wasn't a politician and he got the second highest number for anybody in here, and he wasn't a politician. So maybe, oh my goodness, maybe he did win.
Well, look, I think that Trump has been doing something that nobody's ever seen before, and that's running on earned media. He's basically been tricking the media into covering him 24/7 and getting completely free campaign advertising at will by using his blustering, outrageous reality TV persona. But what that does is attract sort of what I would call the shallower end of the evangelical pool, which was such an important group in Iowa. So I think what we're seeing here is that because Cruz really out-evangelicalized him by actually genuinely speaking evangelical language, by knowing the code words, knowing the theological insider information and politicizing that, Trump wasn't able to do that. I think it was very obvious that Trump knew nothing about Christianity and basically threw out keywords and what he thought people wanted to hear in order to try to attract those voters.
You just came up with a new word, evangelicalize, that we are going to have to use many times, because I'll tell you, that is really a perfect word. Takes me to where I want to go next here, Reverend. Is it not fair to say that coming into Iowa, knowing that nearly 70% of the voters there were evangelical or had some sort of standing in that community, to be able to think that they would not flock to Ted Cruz, and let's not forget Marco Rubio as well, who gets a good portion of those voters. It was a huge miscalculation by people just to think that they wouldn't go there and they would stick with Donald Trump.
Right, and like I was saying, Ed, I think that Trump very much miscalculated how serious the evangelical base is. I think what his evangelicals followers, what we're seeing from them is less about faith and more about white anger, fear, and entitlement. And I think that Trump has been able to pull it off so far, because if you're talking to evangelicals who don't care so much about the teachings of Jesus, but care a lot about a right-wing ideology, then you see how Trump is able to get away with embodying the antithesis of Jesus and his teachings, which are humility, compassion, peace, lifting up the poor and the vulnerable, welcoming the stranger and the immigrant.
But Reverend Crumpton, I have to interrupt you here for just a moment. Donald Trump had said earlier that he is a Christian. He had said earlier that he believes in that. So then why should we not take him at his word?
Well, I think the proof is in the pudding. I think Christians pride themselves, particularly in evangelicals, on being known by their deeds. That was something that Jesus talked about. You're known by how you treat one another. And so bullying and name-calling and childish bans on Muslims and hateful rhetoric is really never going to fly when it comes down to it, unless you're talking to a type of evangelical that is more concerned with financial power and with celebrity and with social status, and the type of evangelical that sees those things as religious piety and therefore political desirability.
Okay. Let me stop you there, because I want to bring Carol back into this right now. Carol, I got to tell you, the Reverend brings up a lot of points that people have been making. White anger, fear, entitlement, a rhetoric that goes on in here. Donald Trump has been, matter of fact, Donald Trump, and even you have to admit it, Donald Trump has been proud of it at many times. Even his followers have told me that he's proud of that kind of arrogance that he throws out there. Has he not learned from Iowa that if he wants to move forward and is serious about becoming president, he's got to dial that back, and he's got to come back a little bit more to the mainstream?
Well, first of all, I think that his concession speech was actually had a lot of humility. I was actually quite surprised by it. But I don't necessarily think that he needs to change his overall strategy, because you have to remember that even though the evangelical voters are very important in Iowa, they are not as much so when you get into a general election. And I think that goes to Donald Trump's broader base of appeal, and the fact that a lot of people are very frustrated by government, and you're seeing it not just with Trump, but you're seeing it on the Democratic side with Bernie Sanders, having the outsider status, being the one that's willing to stand up and doing things in a different way, is the appeal of Donald Trump. A lot of his supporters aren't necessarily backing him, but they're backing what he stands for and what they think that he can do. And they are basically saying to the establishment, we need a change, we need to do something different, and it cannot be politics as usual.
But Reverend Crumpton, I would guess that that's what many people are saying now, is that they fear that it's just that will keep them from voting for Donald Trump, and that has got to be dialed back, and that he cannot succeed if he doesn't. Would you agree with that?
I absolutely agree, because I don't think any of these top three candidates from the Iowa caucus last night are going to fare very well in a general election. You can't be a gay basher and fare well in a general election.
Well, wait a minute. I have to stop you there, Reverend Crumpton. Let me stop you there for 1 second here. Are you telling me that you don't think that Marco Rubio would do well either, or Ted Cruz, even with the backing of the evangelicals?
Absolutely not. Over half of Christians in America believe that equal rights and gay marriage are something that they support and want to see happen in our country.
Okay, then let me ask you this. I've only got about 45 seconds left. In your opinion, then, if it's not Cruz, if it's not Rubio, then whom do you believe the evangelicals should be voting for on the Republican side?
Honestly, I'm really not sure. I'm a fan of Kasich on the Republican side, although I do vote democratically. I think we really need to get back to some moderate values where we take into consideration the well-being of all people in our country.
All right, I only got 15 seconds left. Carol, moving forward, whom do you think has an edge when we head for New Hampshire now?
I certainly think Trump does, and I think in a general, both Trump and Rubio will trounce anybody that the Democrats put up, whether that be Hillary, whether that be Bernie, or whether Biden comes in to save the day.
No, wait a minute. Let's not bring Uncle Joe in this, please. We're going to go ahead and make things even worse than it is right now. Let's stay right there. They're all worried about one guy worried having to get people off his lawn and another about maybe being in an orange jumpsuit, but we'll leave that for another time as well. Reverend Jennifer Crumpton and Carol Roth, always a pleasure to talk to you both. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll talk again soon. Next stop is New Hampshire, and why what happened in Iowa could mean zero by the time we get to next Tuesday. That's coming up next, right here in the fastest 60 minutes of news, The Hardline.